Hey guys, Don Rice here. And what I've got here is one of the elevators. And on the Corsair, most planes that have fabric covering over their elevators, their ailerons and such, the fabric is then, they use needle and thread to sew the fabric down onto the ribs. And then they cover those stitches with pieces of fabric that are pinked or torn or something, but they cover those and then they dope it all together and. So that's not how it was done on the Corsair. So with the Corsair, they'd have a built-up elevator, for instance, and they would then cover that with some kind of fabric and dope. And what they would do to ensure that the fabric stayed adhered to the ribs is they made these battons, which were aluminum strips, and the aluminum strips were then screwed through the covering into the ribs, and that would hold them down. And then they would apply the rib tapes, the pinked tapes, over the top of the battens to make sure that they never went anywhere. And so what I'm going to be doing is recreating those battens and tapes and stuff. So what I've got is some of this stuff. It's evergreen. This is 15 thousandths thick sheets of styrene, and I then cut that up into it's not necessarily a scale thick size or scale width. It's just what I think looks right. This is 125, so it's an eighth of an inch. These are an eighth of an inch wide. I cut up a whole bunch of them. So next thing I did is long ago, and those who have been watching my thread for years will know that I drew this thing up at the beginning, because the very first thing I built on this airplane were the elevators, and I drew up a conversion factor based on the factory drawings for the elevator. And because the ribs are not all spaced equally, so I drew up a conversion table in order to determine exactly the right position and distance based on the Zeroli elevator, in order to find where each of the ribs is. So I've done that years ago, and now I need to use this again in order to mark up the elevator. And so what'll end up happening is, I'll measure this out, and I won't go through all of this with you, but I'll measure it out, and let's say I've got a mark here that says that's where one of the ribs is. I know that all of the ribs are at 90-degree angles to the leading edge of the elevator. So, then it's just an easy matter of wherever those marks are, you come in and just go ahead and draw a line. And that's where one of these simulated battens will go. And so I'm going to go ahead and get this thing marked up, and then I'll bring you back in a little bit later. Okay, so the first step is to get everything marked off, and so all these blue lines mark where the actual rib locations are in their scale positions. And but before I can start gluing in these battens, I need to. There's a couple of pieces of rib taping or pink taping that I need to put in place. So there's a brace here, a sheet metal brace that's under the covering on the real Corsair elevators, and then they add some pinked tapes that double up the fabric that is on the edge of that that sheet metal, and I think they just do it to help ensure that it doesn't tear over time. But that's put there, and I haven't done it yet. But there's a square piece of sheet metal that's a brace that is put on. It's flush with the surface of the ribs, and they cover the thing with they cover the whole thing with fabric of some kind, and then they come back over and they overlap the edge here with pinked tapes. So they do that before they put the battens on. So I've got to do that too. So I've just started that process now, and so I'm just using an iron to, come on, focus in there. There you go. I'm just using an iron. Let's see if this helps. Yeah. So you can see the pinked edging. These are 1/5 scale Warbird pinking tapes from pinkit.com. Gary Seibert over at pinkit.com makes several different sizes, different size pinkings. This is 4/10 of an inch wide, and they look great. They go on nice and easy. They're made out of Solartex. They go on with monocoat iron. Piece of cake. So I finished up this one. I need to get the edging put in around here, and then bring them all up to date, and then I can start with the battens later. Okay, so I finished with the little tapes, and essentially I've cut all the battens to length, but they haven't been glued in place, and these two have been glued in place. And so what I'm doing here is I'll try and show you anyway. So here's the next one that's going in place, and what I do is I just grab it with a piece of Scotch tape, and I know that it's cut to length. It's going to go right there, and because I have some issues, with working with CA, I end up getting CA everywhere. So I'm trying to be careful about this. I know that if I put a little CA on this plastic batten, where'd the pin go? And I'll just, it doesn't dry right away, but I can move the liquid from one end to the other, get a nice thin coat on here, and when I lay it in place, yeah, I've got one shot at getting it right, but I mean that's pretty easy because of the grids that I have in place here. So I can get it laid down just like that, and then the tape doesn't go down against the sides of the plastic pieces. So if a little tiny bit of CA wicks, comes out the side, it's not going to grab onto the tape. It'll just stay right there with the plastic. And so I'm hoping that by doing this, I'll have a nice clean finish, because if I other people might be able to get away with this. But if I were to take this piece right here and simply hold it in place like that right there, and then try and wick a little CA in there, I'd stick my fingers to it twice. and then I would rip it up off of the surface, trying to get my hand back. So you know what, I'm in no hurry, so I'll pick one piece up at a time with the Scotch tape, and ain't no big deal. You know, if it takes me an extra 10 minutes to get them all done, then it takes me an extra 10 minutes to get them all done. But if I'm happy with them, I'm going to say that it's worth the time. It's time well spent. So I just put a little bit on there like that. Takes the CA will make a very thin film. And the thing is, if I don't get full coverage with the CA, maybe some of it dried a little bit before I got it in place. I don't care about that either, because ultimately these things are going to get covered up with ironed-on rib stitching. So anyway, I'll keep working on this, and I'll bring you back in a little bit later. All right, so we're getting down to it here. This side is all done, and got the edge tape on. This is actually 8/10 wide tape, and this was kind of fun to get on. So lay a piece of this on the edge here, and iron it down on the edge, and all the way around the corner on the edge, and then using tweezers, pull on it a little bit as I heat this with a monocoat iron until I get it all down. There's still just a couple of little tiny little seams, but I'm okay with that because you see those on the real one too. It turned out okay though, and so this side's all done. Turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And just to show, how I go about doing this, I've got one piece left to put on this side, and it's the side that caps off all the pieces. It's kind of like how they would lay panels down on for riveting on an airplane. You start at the back and you overlap them going forward, so that, at least whenever possible, so that wind wind won't get under the seams, because the seams are all facing aft. So I just I'll tack it down because of these little battons. They're only 15 thousandths thick, but I want to try and get the rib taping to seal right down the edges of those things as much as possible. So I use one of these little monocoat trim tools and set on high, and I will seal that edge just like that, right down next to the batten. Same on the other side. This gets in there better than my full-sized monocoat iron. I'll go ahead and seal the edges down on all of the battens. I call them battens. I don't really know if that's what they're called. I don't know if that's what Chance Vaught would have called them, or if they just called them, you know, rib sealing strips. I'll just press down on them. You know, I'm looking for, I want to see a slight discoloration, which tells me that I've gotten the right kind of heat and pressure, and that the glue has activated, and it's probably, you know, got a reasonably good seal going on there. I certainly don't ever want any of these to come flying off, and so as soon as I finish this last piece, this last tape, as soon as I finish getting this on, I'm going to go ahead and shoot a light coat primer on this elevator. And because I'll be able to see a little better if I've gotten, you know, have I gotten a good seal everywhere? Will any of these little pinks kind of pop up and, you know, show themselves as having not been properly sealed? All these little tiny triangles that make up that are the pinked edges. You know, there's thousands of them now here, and you don't really want any of them to poke up, because if one of them pokes up, that's the one that's going to draw your eye. That's going to always be the one that people see. And I don't want people to see that. So I get those sealed down around the edges of the battens, and then I'll use the full-size iron, which is a little bit hotter. Makes quicker work of this stuff, and I'll run it over every single one of those little triangles. Again, looking for a little discoloration. It darkens when the glue activates. It's heat activated, of course. But when it activates, you know, hopefully I've got the right amount of pressure. This is one of those things that it's kind of a learned feel. You just kind of have to play with it until you get a feel for it. I'm running my monocoat iron here at full tilt boogie. It's set on high. You don't normally need to use high with with Solar Tex to get a good seal, but I'm running it high because I'm just using this very small tip of the monocoat iron, and I want it to activate quickly and seal without damaging those tiny little pinked triangle edges. Not really pressing down very hard at all. Alright, use a razor blade, just set it right on where I want the cut to be, and then lift away, and it puts a nice clean edge without covering up the previous pinked edge, which is right next to it. So it leaves at, first blush it looks like a nice clean pinked edge. You have to look really close to see that there's another piece on top of it. Nobody will ever see into the hinge line once the plane's done, so I don't really care what it looks like in here. I just want to make sure that the edge is nice and sealed, and it's out of sight. use the sharper edge of the trim tool to make sure I've got it sealed down into that corner right there. I don't need any of this covering to be impeding on my hinge movement, so I'll cut that piece out right there, which leaves the whole hinge area clear. Okay, there we go. Both sides are done. So, just one more step. Okay, final installment. So, I wiped the whole thing down with some denatured alcohol and a tack cloth. And I should probably put a glove on, but I'm not gonna. So, ta-da! Okay, so I don't know what we can see. Can we still see the I can still see detail. I don't know if you can still see it on the camera. Hopefully. But you want those pinked edges. You don't want to shoot so much paint on there that you lose sight of those pinked edges. And you can see that there are rib holding down aluminum strip batten thingies underneath those pinked tapes. So, okay, that's it. I'm gonna let this one dry, and then probably take a day off before I go do the other one, because this is basically taking, I don't know, like 6 hours, and too much damn time is what it's taking. Anyway, there it is. This elevator is just about pretty much ready for final paint, I think. Woohoo! All right, so later, guys.